Hello lovely people. Hi, I'm Sam, this is Shadow Harvest, and today let's talk about the responsibilities in representing magic, whether that be nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and all of the above. This is going to be a long one, so a beverage. I have this cute little mug that says I'm a meat suit full of coffee. How much of it is us as creators, practitioners, whatnot, in representing it in general? I think that's kind of the question I am poking at here in this video, and the levels of it, because first things first, anything in creation is not to be held up, even a holy text should not be held up as the be-all end-all of texts, of things, of the pinnacle of representation. Everything is going to have flaws. Why? Because it's all created by us humans. Even if something is been said to have been passed down from the divine itself in whatever form that may be, a human had to do the translation. Something probably got missed, we know. So when it comes to representing religion, spirituality, and magic as a practice, always knowing and having that little bit of like grain of salt in all things that it comes from humans, we are fallible, is extremely important. And also I think important for us to remember as ourselves as we are creating things. Creating this video, channels, other people talking about things, books, other media. We're fallible, right? We're coming from that point. That being said, that does not mean that we get off scot-free by just saying, oh, I'm a fallible person, it's why it's all wrong and horrid and a horrible representation of everything. I think also too is understanding the time and space when a piece of media is created. I'm going to level a whole lot more responsibility on someone, say, from today who has access to things such as the internet and many a book than say someone from back in the day, because we didn't have as much access to the lovely informations. Magic is always going to be a thing that is so, I think, interwoven and fascinating for humans in general, right? Because it is interwoven with our very creation. It is always the thing we reach for when something we cannot explain kind of percolates in our minds. We are prone to finding reasons for things and how things all construct and grip together. And it's even more understandable when we don't have a quick scientific explanation for something, or it is currently being studied, or the people who are known as the experts come back with, I don't know, we don't know. I really would love to do an entire video on dark matter and how that's kind of exciting for me as a layman who doesn't know much about anything to the study of dark matter, other than the little perusing that I do on the interwebs about it from time to time, because I think it's going to answer a lot about how we touch things energetically and how possibly certain things that we do as practitioners of any sort of intention work could possibly be translated in through dark matter. I think that could be a possibility. It's fun. But when it comes to representing magic in media, nonfiction versus fiction, and even more so, personal expression. If you do not know, I am a creator myself, obviously, of content, but beyond the videos, I have poetry collections. I have published 2 of them. Are none of them in my Witchcraft bookshelf. That is just sad. What am I doing? I'm a horrible person at representing myself. 1 minute. These are both poetry collections that are greatly influenced by my personal use of magic and my personal craft. And no one can tell me how best to express that or not. When it comes to nonfiction of people being biographical and them explaining their perceptions, then it is very, very on us, I believe, as the consumers of the media to remember, take what they do, but not leave it as gospel. This is one person's interpretation, one person's look at things. And so I think the responsibility becomes a little bit less. Beyond that, when it comes to teaching, ooh, it gets trickier. Right? Our ideas of spells and magic and representing it in its multitudes, not as something purely good, purely bad, something that just is, can be tricky, especially when talking about things that maybe we don't know as much about. If you've been here from the start of this channel, which I don't know how many of you still are, but I got into witchcraft and all this through Wicca first by exposure on YouTube to a couple of channels, and then I started researching and picking up books, and I've been practicing witch for 6-7 years now. Even not that long ago, when I found occult shops or were perusing things, the most easiest access I had to something was Wicca. And when you're reading a book that was a teaching form of Wicca, they were espousing a lot of things as this is the gospel way for Wicca. These are true things that happened in the past for 100% sureties. These are 100% traditions that have been passed down in secret for a long time. And if you just take those books at their face value, even as teaching tools, it's hard to not believe. If something is coming at you from a teaching perspective, the responsibility grows, right? I hesitate when I read any book as a consumer, as from a teaching perspective, because of the interesting whiplash I had over the past few years, where suddenly, after reading so many different books on the basis of Wicca, and even going to a coven that was Wiccan based and deciding whether or not I wanted to join, ultimately ended up not wanting to, because there was something about the very big group ceremonial aspect of certain parts of Wicca that I was experiencing, and that just wasn't resonating for me. But then later on, finding out all of these different things about how the founders were kind of picking and choosing, were also kind of really sexist, and different aspects. Like, it's very hard to ever find one wholesome teacher, guru, practitioner, high priestess, priest, what have you, that is entirely 100% infallible and is 100% doing something and teaching of something from just the goodness of their heart, without any ulterior motive, even if that other motive is something as simple as they just want to make a little bit extra money to put food on their own table. Or it's because they haven't done their own exploration to see how they could be not unpacking something. But when it comes to our responsibility to teach in media, it's higher. People are taking your word as gospel. They're maybe young, first introduction to the craft, and you don't want to misrepresent something while also conveying its multitudes. It's difficult as well when you are confronted with the people who see your spiritual path and or religion and magic as a whole as a joke, as a purely fantastical thing. It makes you want to say, no, this is a real thing. This is the legitimate pathways through history that people have looked at this, and you double down in defensiveness of this thing that you find sacred. I have done this in the past. I would shut up about some of my witchcraft stuff because I knew how defensive I would get to people in my life in general, right? I refuse to teach some things because I realized I was like, ooh, I don't necessarily have a good explanation for why I do certain things the way I do. I just have seen it work. And even as a person who likes to delve into the scientific and sees things and sees how science and magic could interweave, I can see how the scientific method would poke holes in things, because science and spirituality kind of somewhat go together, but still very much diverge from each other very frequently. And so I can understand why certain texts and books can come through very firmly and do it from a place of defensiveness, or from a place of trying to establish it as worthy of being written at all. I really hope that people see the multitudes and the falsities and the issues with a thing not as something that completely deems it unworthy. Just because some people have done a magical thing or attempted a spell or whatnot and it has not worked doesn't mean that they haven't worked for everybody. Just because I did not resonate with Wicca doesn't mean that if it works for you, you shouldn't go down it, even if there are big issues and times with its founding and practices. Errors or issues within a thing do not mean that the entirety of the thing is rotten to its core. There could still be good pieces of it that are worth exploring and examining and espousing in any sort of media. And the cult of accuracy is a difficult thing within the magical community. Having firm proof of your thing is helpful, whether that's I have the first ever mythos of this god and that's why my version is correct, yada yada yada, or this spell has been found in spell books ye olden days. And here's the thing with the ye olden stuff. Again, kind of circling back to my first point, humans are fallible. Humans have ulterior motives. So often, when thinking of the media we are consuming, even ancient media, that archaeologists find, one, what are the archaeologists looking for, and what are their that they don't even realize their personal biases are changing how they're interpreting a thing. I still haven't done it yet, but I really am eager to read the new translation. I believe it's of the Odyssey by a woman translating it for the first time, because she says she sees a whole lot of very different inaccuracies and interesting translations, because always previously the translations have been done into English by men, and seeing a total difference of that will be fascinating. Just by that alone, just by our gender and how we act in this world, can do so much for how we take a certain words and bits and pieces. Let alone say some of our sources come from things like the Catholic Church. One of my favorite books when I first started out is this book, The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish. And after I read a few books on Wicca, I wanted to learn more about the occult and the history of witchcraft and stuff in general. And this book is fascinating because as I was looking at all of these things in here, time and time again, he kept referencing the church as the authority on witchcraft. And doesn't that tell you something about, like, oh, well, this confession was ripped from this person, this was ripped from this person, this. If that's the only written thing we have though down, because maybe all of the records were destroyed or all of the records were oral histories, of course there's going to be issues with that, and it should be judged harshly for it. I think similarly along with, there's a easier one here, what was it, by Greer, the occult book. It's a much more snapshot of histories. I don't think you can see, and things are falling over on my occult shelf, no. But time and time again, we have to think of who the hell is telling the thing. If it's the church, let's take everything they say with a freaking huge grain of salt. When it comes to magic and the occult and paganism and witchcraft in general, they see it as it's gonna be interesting, if not an outright lie. The start of Wicca, some of these histories seem extremely Celtic, and so isn't there an interest of it being possibly more Irish and or Scottish of their countries now, of nature, with them holding on to things? How much of it was wiped away, not just by the church coming in, but specifically by England's colonization, things of this manner. When you hear of a book of someone who looks like me and is talking about any sort of Hindu god or any sort of practices that don't come from grains of salt, how much of it was, did they just read a book or attend a class or do a thing about it? And if they're presenting themselves as experts, we should be a little worried, a little concerned. I do believe we have a huge responsibility to make sure that when we're in a teaching mode or writing any sort of nonfiction, we, one, teach it from what we know, but also very heavily disclose to the people that we are expounding to, whether it's in a little biff at the start or end of a book saying like, yo, here are all my sources of this, please check it out at your own leisure, or hey, grains of salt, no, I'm not of this community, if that is what you're writing a thing about, something that's not of your community. And making sure that when we are, you know, getting into things, that it is our thing to be getting into. Should we be the ones representing this? Should we be the face of it? With even our interpretation. All of that in nonfiction is super freaking important. Let's talk about the fiction stuff. And this is where I'm having interesting thoughts and feelings in general. I am, obviously I've written some things, but I'm currently writing a fiction novel. It is a paranormal romance. It will star demons. It is fun. And it is interesting how I have had this question now a lot of witchcraft and magic and demonology and all these things in media, and how much of it is our responsibility to, in fiction, portray something accurately, and or when is inspiration taken a bit too far and too much craziness is leaned on. You know, I think of media codes back in the day and how deeply things like the church and Christianity and or other restrictive religions have come in at times and really compressed what is being said or what is done. There is a lot of talk about specifically anything to do with dark magic and or white magic, how that very quickly becomes a duality thing that maybe doesn't necessarily represent witchcraft or paganism from so many other realms. And also specifically how racist things that are declared dark magic is actually be in movies, in horror films, even something as simple as Harry Potter. There is a lot of references to things that are considered darker and they're immediately deemed evil. And yet when you pull back elements of it, you realize so much of these spells or things that people represent in fiction and seen as darker or the bad side of magic have direct ties into voodoo or voodoo, hoodoo, any sort of magic that ties back into Black or African or Santeria culture with brujeria or anything of the Hispanics or the Mayans, or you see what I'm saying? Suddenly it's, oh, the white magic that is somewhat representative of the magic version of Christianity, kind of like the two sides are still like kind of happening. Anything that's like just like slightly adjacent over here, that's white magic. That's the good stuff. That's the healing good things. Whereas black magic, the dark stuff over here, this is bad. And what are the sources of these two things? What is the inspiration coming from that makes something dark versus makes something light? This is something important and something to really think about. I've caught myself several times in writing my books and characters and thinking about the world and the magic system and how things operate, of what I'm pulling on, and making sure that I write what I know and I'm not accidentally, by my own bias from the media and things I've seen before, end up writing something that unintentionally but still categorizes something that is just different to the things that I've been exposed to as evil or wrong or inherently gross and yucky and we should be avoiding. Some version of that, right? I think of all the TV shows that I've consumed before of Charmed is a good one. The whole existence of white lighters and basically angels, and how Wicca is kind of there, but mostly it's like this weird, just, they're still the source of all evil, the devil. It's like a weird Christianization different thing that just kind of like pops up between these two without really exploring the multitudes of moralities within witchcraft. It still very much has this duality thing. I think something that's more fun is like American Horror Story, the Witchcraft one, where a lot of people had a lot of issues with how they represented the New Orleans witches and voodoo. There is constant issues even with other culty classic movies, even just always depicting a witch as something that was evil from olden things, or a witch as someone who is like a hyper feminist ridiculousness. What is it? The Love Witch, I think, is a I like that movie, hate that movie, and also like am fascinated by it all at the same time. This like woman who comes in and has this very almost oddly patriarchal view of love magic and how she's going to get her man and all that. Like, it is fascinating how our different ideas and beliefs have woven into things. Even more so, I find, where the bits of media that are so often enjoyed and parade around to witches as something really, really fun are things that actually hold the most accuracy to our actual day-to-day crafts. I'm thinking of things like Practical Magic or The Craft, 90s and early 2000s fun classics, where actually no, there is real representation in them. Or a more modern one would be Sabrina the Teenage Witch. There were, well, great liberties taken, a lot of really fun hints and picks of, if you are someone who does practice witchcraft, within there, right? Like, I can tell clearly they were taking a lot of creative liberties with things in general. I wasn't looking for 100% accuracy from that type of show. But the little hints, the little callbacks, little like nods from clearly someone on their creative team who knows something about witchcraft, paganism, someone who's obviously at least dabbled at some point, had a hand in that. And those little call outs are really, really fun for a practitioner like myself. Something as simple as a freaking hell of a boss, or why is it? Oh my god, Has Been Hotel, that's the other one. The actual sigils of the demons being present is interesting for people who have calls back to that. Those little touches of accuracy in this huge delving of inspiration is something that I deeply enjoy, those little bits of Easter eggs. But like, how hard do we have to hold to those? Is, again, the cult of accuracy is such a thing that, I don't know, sometimes I feel like it can cripple creatives, because it feels like almost a safe cop-out in a sense of like, let's tap into and use this thing that's already been built in the real world to make it a little fun callback or foundation of a thing, as opposed to building a whole new advanced realm and system when it comes to magic. Also too, it is a little bit hard to say, like, how do you reinvent the wheel? There are some people do say there's a limit to creativity, there's a limited amount of stories we can tell. Even if that is kind of so, I always think a new perspective of every story kind of gives unlimited stories to tell, because there's always a new perspective on something. How inventive can you really be? Can you create a whole new realm of magic? Can you find these whole new systems? I am, while writing my book, so intrigued by reading specifically fantasy books with a magical system that is based in other cultures than Western magical practices. What did I recently read that was so fascinating? I'm super into right now some Jinn based mythos and some magic systems that come with that. Was it the Bronze City books? City of Brass has been on my want to read list for a long time. I also just finished book 1 of, where did it go? Not currently reading. What am I doing? Children of Blood and Bone, The Legacy of the Orisha. Amazing, interesting magical system, especially because it's tied in with gods, which is super fascinating to me as a pagan. Great fantasy book there. Something as simple as like House of Salt and Sorrows, which is based off of the story of the dancing sisters, ghosts, and how they tap in, and these levels of magic and what's going on. The Jinn Waits 100 Years, fascinating, fun little book that I've read recently with very interesting ghosts and whatnot. The Iron Widow, which I guess sci-fi fantasy based, but magic / science system based in cheese. There are so many different interesting ways of going about a magic system, but they inevitably, even the ideas we come up with, we are influenced by what we're surrounded with and our root. And so making sure we are evaluating while we're writing, but not allowing us or creating in any way, shape, or form videos, drawing comics, making TV shows, what have you. Doing all of that and knowing that our creation is being influenced by the things we've already consumed, and making sure that we are not blindsided by our own lack of knowledge, or by where are the roots of our influence and our inspiration coming from? What is it about this element that we are putting into our stories, regardless of whether they're fantasy or fiction? Where is that coming from, right? I have a big issue, if you can't already tell, with stories that delve specifically with black and white. Things that are very good and evil without exploring the multitudes of things in betweens, the moral grayness of our world. I have a really big issue with that type of stuff. I don't like anything to be seen as purely bad, because so rarely are things purely bad, especially from a spiritual standpoint or a magic standpoint. There's give and a take. There are levels, of course, but I try really hard to make sure that there is that moral relativism? That's, you know what I'm trying to say, in my stories, because that's so important to me. But where am I maybe in doing so not pointing out harsh enough a problem in my stories, or not exploring things, or, you know, outright calling out something that I am vehemently against in my stories? It's a tricky thing to do, and yet it's something I think we do have a responsibility as creators to represent, especially when it comes to magic and how it's represented. I think of how not that long ago, I don't know, I grew up during a time where there were several kids in my class in elementary school that could not read Harry Potter because of how it was representing magic at all, right? And not that long ago, we had very strict media codes about what we could and could not put out to anyone, to the public. Seeing anything deemed as immoral by a lot of basically that black and white Christian standard, at least in America, became a huge problem for creators. You couldn't show gay people any sort of alternative religion. Couldn't even show sex in any kind of totally fine way if it wasn't within these very specific parameters that demonized acts and alternative ways of thought. And so that demonization is very important, I think, to constantly think about. How are you portraying something? Is it a previous demonization trope of a thing that is percolating within your own magic system that you've created? That all being said, with fiction and fantasy, that cult of accuracy, and this is where I call it a cult of accuracy that percolates up in especially online spaces. So many things are up for interpretation, and someone just expressing an opinion, or a character expressing an opinion in a place of media, if it is fiction or fantasy, it's not necessarily what the freaking author believes, or even if it is just one aspect of a thing, right? It could just be a seed that is taken from the inspiration. I adore looking into and reading about demons and where this idea of this ill and or more malevolent entity has percolated up in our spiritual cultures, and how interesting they are to our growing understanding about magic and how things evolve. I am forever intrigued about how quickly the church took several gods of old and turned some into saints and others into demons. Who picked what? Was it just the population's like reticence to do such a thing? And so, you know, think of the thousands of different ways that the Bible has then been spun out into levels of fiction. I think of Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy, and where from him we got the depictions of hell that so many people think of today. You know, so many things that he describes are actually not at all in the Bible in any way, shape, or form, and yet people still very much relate these two things. I think of Faust and a Faustian deal with the devil, the selling of souls. Where did that come from? It didn't come from the Bible. It came from the story of Faust, from Marlowe. Basically, what happens when a demon does come to you and tries to get your soul? What is that situation? How does that all hash out? And now that then goes in and percolates all the things. The idea of selling your soul to a demon is very ubiquitous throughout our culture, and especially when you think of fantasy and horror movies and demons, it's a major part of that trope, I guess, if you're using demons at all, which I am. At least in my first fantasy novel, it's fun. So yeah, it's taking those little bits of inspiration and knowing that that's what they actually are, right? Like adding that accuracy, making sure you're representing things, but knowing ultimately that you're creating your own story, your own version of events, and allowing yourself the freedom to play, to explore, to pick apart an idea or a system of thought, expand upon it, or just explore it from a whole new angle. Like I said, some people think there are no stories, but I believe there's always a new angle to every story. Not allowing that cult of accuracy to hold us back and things. I've done several videos previously about how I have not been doing spells, or that magic could be easy even. Like it doesn't have to be this whole huge ass complicated thing. Same thing goes when creation and putting magic and systems into media and stories. There is some thought that should go into it, and we do have a responsibility as creators to make sure that we aren't causing further harm in our creations and what we put out there. But that is not to say that we are shackled with all responsibility of every single person who ever picks up our book, that they would get the right interpretation of what we're trying to put out there. I also think too, it is the unfortunate and yet also fortunate bit that you have to kind of come to and realize as a creator, that there are some people who are not going to understand your works or like your works or come at your works from any sort of positive angle, no matter what you do. There are some people who are going to read my poetry books who absolutely can't stand it. There are people who look at my art and think it is ridiculous. There are people who hear me even talking about my spirituality, hear the sound of my voice, and it grates them in such a way they're like, absolutely not this bitch again. Some people can't be pleased. I can do my most, everything perfectly done as a creator of a piece of media. But it's not on me to make sure that every person who touches my work has a good sense of media literacy and can understand and take exactly what I want from it. I hope people even read my stuff and maybe get something totally new that I never even thought of from my works. Go off and write stories of their own, inspirations and bits at tittle off. I think of all the amazing pieces of media, even the ones I've mentioned here where maybe I have some critiques of. It doesn't matter so much of their flaws, because ultimately they were things that I enjoyed consuming, and things that even if I do have issues with problems and would like to solve or maybe rewrite, or, you know, I then take those bits of inspiration and fuel them into my own writing and creativity and know that that's good and that's fine enough. It doesn't always have to be all the burden on me. I do have some responsibility, but not all of it. Media literacy is the thing that we should be doing. Anyway, what do you feel the responsibility is of witchy, pagan, spiritual creators when making media? Do you have some hard lines or some guidelines or things to follow? Are there some things in media that you hate to see when it comes to witchcraft, magic, and the whatnot? All of that in the comments down below. And more videos are coming at a regular pace, I freaking promise. Especially for Youtober. I don't think I will be doing the full ass video a day thing, as I have fallen off that every single time, but I'm gonna try to do 3 videos a week in the month of October, so we'll see what's going on. But anyway, thank you so much for watching if you guys have gotten all the way to the end of this very long video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.